Today, we are welcoming our 80th guest on the Life, Health and the Universe podcast. I feel like I should have balloons and streamers for you, Jen. Uh, you're the 80th guest, so thank you for joining us.
Oh,
Jen Lewis is an ADHD specialist and coach dedicated to helping individuals understand their unique brains and develop practical strategies that work with the ADHD system. She also focuses on emotional regulation, a common challenge for ADHDers. Now, Jen, before we hit record, I told you I was keeping my intro of you super short because, I know that you've just got so much that you're going to share with us. So there was so much I could have included in the intro, Jen, but I thought I would hand over to you. And ADHD is obviously a pretty hot topic now, so we are not going to be
yes.
short of things to talk about. But do you want to give us a bit of an outline of who you are, what you do, how you got into this work, and then we'll sort of get into the nuts and bolts. Welcome.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. Lovely to be here, popping my podcast cherry.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
on your 80th. Yeah, it's lovely. Thank you. So, yeah, ADHD specialist and coach. So, in my previous life, I guess for many years, I worked for corporates and I was an exec coach for quite a while. Got two young boys, so 8 and 13. And I may jump around because I'm thinking of your few questions.
That's okay.
But how did I get into this? So I suppose the bits that are relevant for today is because we're talking about the emotional regulation piece. And even though I was really an optimistic person and always have been, I didn't realize that I also had a bit of emotional dysregulation. And I started about 10, 11 years ago, went on this mindfulness course. And I can remember my exec coach at the time has suggested it. And I can remember sitting in this room with about 30 other people for weeks on end. And I was thinking, why are they getting all of these insights? And I was really frustrated with it and et cetera, et cetera. But I powered on and I powered through it. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, I think I was probably one of the most transformed people throughout the whole course. It had really changed my physiology, my regulation. At that time, didn't know that I had ADHD. Anyway, fast forward a few years, I actually started teaching mindfulness because it had changed me in so many ways. It had brought me to so much peace. And I just dealt with things internally so differently. So then, fast forward, my now 8-year-old was diagnosed at age 3 with oppositional defiance, with ADHD. I know it's early, but I struggled for that first couple of years. I had one boy, he's actually inattentive ADHD, but they present very differently. So you'll discover there's inattentive ADHD, there's hyperactive ADHD, and then there's the two combined. Anyway, my youngest was super different from other kids. And I knew that there was something there, not particularly something wrong, but just something very different. And I struggled for a couple of years, really struggled. It was hard. And then when he got diagnosed, it was like my whole world changed. It was like I put on my big girl pants, if that makes sense. And I was like, right, it's no longer why do I have all of these challenges and this struggle with his behaviors and the differences? But it was like, this little kid needs me. He really needs me. And he's come to me for a reason, you know? So, yeah, that was when I really started doing all of the developmental courses with kids, with the ADHD stuff, just learning so much about it. And then within that, started recognizing everything in myself. And I remember the pediatrician said to me, oh, well, it's usually family related. And I laughed at the time and said, well, it wouldn't be their dad because he's very neurotypical. But it still took a year or two to start recognizing, oh, I think that's me. I think that's me. So I went through this, as many late diagnosed women went through this process. And even though I knew when I got diagnosed, it was still this massive process of recontextualizing everything, of some not too much regret, but a bit of sadness, a bit of relief, really understanding myself more. And then, so I was already an executive coach, I was already a mindfulness teacher, and learning all of this about this world. I just thought, hold on a minute, who needs these internal skills more than people with ADHD? So I went on to do my ADHD training, and I went on with ADCA, and I ended up doing their advanced program. It's about 18 months, but you learn so much. First, they make you learn so much about ADHD, and then obviously more advanced in the coaching set with the ADHD lens. I would say I wouldn't rather be doing anything else in the whole world. It is so rewarding. When people come to me, they come to me thinking, quite often thinking that they need help with strategies. And what they discover is that I'm just thinking of a lady that I recently had, and she said, she was 48 actually, and she said, I knew I had the map. I even had the vehicle. I just couldn't get there. And she said, I went to Jen thinking she's going to just make me do this. And she said, what I didn't realize was that I'd been trying for all these years to do things in a neurotypical way when all I had to do was find my own way through it. And I think that's what is so rewarding. And oftentimes as well, people come in the shoulds, right? They come in this, I should be doing this and I should be doing that. When we discover underneath it, and they say, actually, no, I shouldn't. Who cares? This is the way that I want to authentically live my life. So, helping people understand their ADHD systems in a way that doesn't slant towards I'm broken, I'm a deficit, and neither either. It's like it's not one or the other. It's not I'm broken, it's not it's all superpowers, because there are big challenges, but it's more of I have a different operating system. I haven't been taught this operating system when I was growing up, because 95% of the world are neurotypical. So let's relearn, let's unlearn what I've learned, let's relearn my own system, and then find the strengths, find the way through. So yeah, and I think one thing to be very aware of is that the medical model is probably more focused on deficits. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but the medical model focuses on what's the deficits, how can we medicate that? Whereas the coaching model focuses on this is a different operating system that we don't actually know. So how can we get to know the system so that we can find ways around it that flow in with our system rather than being a deficit space? Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. And it must be a real challenge for people experiencing ADHD because like you said, 95% of the people are neurotypical. So like the world is set up for for that. And if you don't fit in, if you're what is it
Yep,
they say, a square peg in a round hole,
absolutely. Absolutely.
just give them something, numb it. Like,
Yes.
and
Or
I'd
help
love to
them.
hear a little bit more about your like what is ADHD, because although I've heard of it and like so many people, it's like in, so many conversations come up with adults and, whether it's them having the experience or them having their children be diagnosed with ADHD. It just seems like more and more people are saying that. But I don't really know what it is. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's a term that we've heard of and it's becoming more common or seemingly.
Yeah.
But what is it and how does it present and how do you experience
Yeah.
it?
So it's attention deficit is such a I think that's one out of, so many things. And it's, well, it's stigmatized, but it also doesn't really convey the right thing. For a start, as we know, it's not often an attention deficit, but it's an attention surplus, or attention just being in the different place to where it should be. So people with ADHD, they often have, how does my partner describe it? They'll be talking and they'll go, oh, possum. So it's usually an attention surplus. There are so many traits. If we think there's different parts of the brain that are responsible for different things, right? So you've got well, there's many other parts involved, but the prefrontal cortex. So think of it as the exec function of the brain. So the exec function of the brain is responsible for forward planning, organization, memory, regulating. And then you've got this other part of the brain and the nervous system that's more kind of in the feeling and the emotions. So the challenges with ADHD are that the executive function often is not operating as it would in a neurotypical. So you'll see it described as so many different things. You'll see it described as the conductor of the brain or the policeman of the brain. I think Gabor Mate's got a book and he talks about the policeman's gone to sleep on the job. So the executive function is not working as it should. The way I like to describe it is that a neurotypical brain is more of an importance-based brain. So therefore, it goes, oh, that's important. I should do that. Then the right neurochemicals all fire up and the brain goes to do that.
Okay.
Whereas an ADHD brain is more of an interest-based brain or an emotional significance-based brain. So the ADHD brain says, that's important. I should do that. Yet the right neurochemicals don't always fire up to go and do the thing. So it's not necessarily based on importance. We know it's important, but if it's not emotionally significant, there will be a type of either hyperarousal, like going into an overwhelm around it, or there'll be a hypoarousal where you can't lift to do it. You know, that whole procrastination thing? Sometimes there's just this kind of shutdown response. So it's a very nuanced and I suppose different operating system, but that's the easiest way I get to describe it. And that emotional significance is really important. And I'll give you an example. For example, that the working memory. I went out and I had a big crack in my windscreen in the car, and I just thought, right, I should get that fixed. Do you think I could remember outside of seeing the crack in the car to actually write it down or get it fixed? So I must have seen it 100 times, but because it wasn't emotionally significant to me, nothing was done about it until the windscreen cracked. Well, of course, I remembered to do it then, and I've always remembered to keep the windscreen intact from now on. But what I mean is, if there's no immediate or real consequence or reward attached, the brain can't hang on to it. So that's just working memory. Emotional regulation. So I'm just thinking actually, there's a guy called Dr. Andrew Hill. Can't remember where he works for, but he works in the brain. And I once read that he said that people with ADHD produce much more theta brain waves than neurotypical people, which was interesting. So there's studies in the brain. But if we've got the executive function and the regulation piece that is more challenged, then it makes sense that people with ADHD have a bit more regulation challenges because say if you're in your fight or flight, say if you're in your emotional, something hits your emotions quite hard, you're going to perceive things in a more negative light, right? There's I'm thinking of this, I think it's HBR, Your Brain in Conflict, and it talks about how when the connections between the limbic system and the different parts, when we're in fight or flight, they're constricted. So we're only able to see in black and white. We're only able to see in this kind of I'm right, you're wrong. So perception for people with ADHD is sometimes a little bit more I don't want to say negative, but sometimes it is more a bit, what's happening when we're in fight or flight? There's a couple of different parts of, and this is in general, by the way, that should be said that I always say in general, not every person with ADHD. We've all got our stories and our upbringing and our different systems. But in general, people with ADHD have is it a higher or a lower HRV, heart rate variability? Which one's the one that's less? Yeah, it's really interesting. There's studies.
Lower is not as favorable.
So
HRV.
it must be lower. So it's the stress tolerance, basically, the
Okay.
body's
Yeah.
ability to come back from stress.
Yeah.
There's also, they talk about how the ADHD system can often mimic a trauma system. So it's like
Oh.
that nervous system. Yeah, Janina Fisher, she's a trauma expert, and I heard her once talking about ADHD and trauma and how the systems can mimic each other in that they get knocked into that fight or flight more easily. So in general, people are born with ADHD with that biology that is more reactive rather
Okay.
than responsive. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But
Yeah.
one of the things that I love and is absolutely true, and I teach it, is Deb Dana. She's an expert on the nervous system, and she talks about how biology shapes experience, but experience also shapes biology, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Nadine, I've heard you talking about it's your
Epigenetics.
mind and your
Yeah.
mindset, right?
Yeah.
So yes, people with ADHD are typically born with a more sensitive is the right word, sensitive nervous system. But we can also choose, if we have conscious choice, to work on that and develop and regulate our own biology. And when I did that mindfulness that few months, and what I went on to do afterwards is 100% like evidence. I remember my sister, I hadn't seen her for years, and she came out to Australia to see me, and she said, "Jen, you're so different." I said, "Oh, it must be all the mindfulness." But it was just this different. I'll tell you what I was like before. Well, I didn't have a lot of patience.
Oh, right.
I didn't have a lot of patience. But yeah, so it's this really kind of nuanced, different system. But I guess what I'm saying again out of that is that once we get to know our system, we can then have a choice
Mm.
over what to do with that. I mean, when I learn the answer to working memory, I'll come back to you. But
That's
but with
okay.
most other things, yeah. So what is ADHD? It is so nuanced. You've got all of the
Mm.
working memory, you've got the rejection sensitive, you've got the ADHD is just a different operating system that has all of these different parts that when we get to know them, sometimes in isolation, sometimes together, we can then get through. And yeah, yeah. So
Wow. Okay. So, um, how do we differentiate, right? Because, okay, lots of people, so let's just use, I might not be a very good example, but a woman our age who is busy, frazzled, got, well, I've got a lot of tabs open on my computer, I can tell you that much.
mm,
Jumping from one thing to the other, forgets their keys, does all of these things. But if you go online and do a survey, have I got ADHD? Like, I feel like you could easily tick a lot of those boxes, and
mm,
an online program could tell you that you've got that. But
yeah.
is there a difference between that person who's like got a lot of things on the go, is a bit forgetful, you know, is it when it does it start to affect your life in a different way? I guess that's kind of like, how do we know the difference? Like
How do we
between
know the
someone who
difference of
does,
whether it's, yeah,
whether it's a lifestyle related, yeah, we're all busy,
exactly. And I
distracted,
think,
we've got our phone, our computer, our, someone's ringing a list of, a mile long.
yeah.
And, a lot of people, I feel like associate that kind of attention deficit with,
Oh, yes. The amount of people that have said, "Oh, I think I've got a bit of
yeah,
ADHD." And they're
yeah,
clearly very neurotypical,
right.
but they're just overwhelmed or they've just got a
Yeah.
long to-do list
But
or
also,
something
I
like
think
that.
that the messaging is kind of like distorted. So
It's very
yeah. So
distorted.
how do we tell the difference? How would you tell the difference?
So I would say that somebody that is neurotypical and without ADHD, if they're saying, like I feel like I've got ADHD or there's a bit of overwhelm, there's a lot of situational and environmental things that play into it. But if you take that person out of a busy life, an
Mm,
overwhelmed life, are those traits still in play?
right.
Do they still have the working memory impairments? Do they still have the emotional dysregulation? Do they still have all of the things that come along with ADHD, or do those things go away? And I think the world that we're living in now, this overstimulated world, has probably also made that overlap harder to see. And
Mm,
so, unless you are deeply knowledgeable about it, I can understand why it gets belittled. I can understand why people that don't know it deeply would think, well, what are they talking about? I get that too. Or
mm,
how do I know? But I would say, if you took that person out of the busy, crazy environment that we're living in today, and all of those things were still in play, then that's a good indicator.
yeah. Okay. So if someone thought that they might be, What would they do? Would they go to a doctor or a specialist, or like, does a doctor, does it feel like a doctor knows enough about it to be able to say yes you are or no you're not, or would they refer you
Well,
on, or how does that all work?
yeah, as far as I know, doctors do not get a lot of training at all, maybe a day or something like that. It's probably a bit like the menopause thing.
Mm,
5 minutes training. I shouldn't be sarcastic, but it's typically a psychiatrist.
okay.
Interestingly, psychiatrists, I remember when I first got diagnosed and I had so many questions for my psychiatrist, and he just kind of didn't really answer any of them. And my other psychiatrist, he was amazing actually. And when I went in first to see him, this was for medication. And he said to me, "Well, I'm a bit intimidated by you now." And I said, "Why?" He said, "You're an ADHD coach." And I said, "Oh, yes, I've been told I know about 90% more than you." I was joking. But what I'm saying is, yes, you do go to a psychiatrist, but they won't necessarily know the practical aspects, the nuance aspects. They just know it from a medical
Mm,
standpoint. So, who do you go to? Formally, sure, a psychiatrist to get diagnosed, but then
okay.
who do you go to learn more about it? Well, obviously, a
Jen.
lot of people go to attitude, and well, yeah, people that have been not only living it, but learning it and helping people understand it for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just the reason I asked that is because there is that differing experience, but I don't know. It feels like it's coming up more and more. Like you said, there's people that go, "Oh, I think I've got it," and then they do an online
Yeah.
quiz that tells them that they do have it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so then they fly the flag. But there's obviously some real differences. I think this is really important because I just want the listeners to understand from someone who knows what they're talking about, not
Yeah, and
Google.
maybe I should, yes, and maybe I should touch a bit on the inattentive versus hyperactive side,
Yeah,
actually,
okay.
because that might be quite helpful. So, and I'll give you an example. My son, without knowing, my older son, without having known any of this stuff, I would never known about the inattentive. So, inattentive ADHD presents very, very different. That person might look very placid, and they might look like they're away with the fairies, and they might be not interrupty or not emotionally dysregulated. Interestingly, I think that it was Russell Barkley who was arguing for emotional dysregulation to be included in the DSM, but not for inattentive people with ADHD. So it presents very differently. Um, Hyperactive is much more obvious. Obviously, it might look like talking really fast and talking about 10 different things at once and jumping to different conversations. Or it might look like, that classic not being able to sit still or getting hyper focused into things. That's
Okay.
another thing, is hyper focus for people with ADHD. You might get stuck in something for hours. So, and then you've got combined, which is the inattentive and the hyperactive together. So you've got all sorts of strengths and challenges. And sorry, Possum, what was the question?
Do you know what? I got a possum as well. No. What was the question? I was listening. I was listening intently. Um,
Was it how would you know or something?
yeah, you were talking about the two different. You answered
The two
you
different
answered the
types.
question,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
we went on to the two different types and how they can be quite different in the way someone experiences them. Right, the
Yeah.
inattentive compared to the hyperactive.
Yeah.
Mm.
And the hyperactive type is that kind of it's interesting because you said something earlier about that. How do you tell a neurotypical and that overwhelm?
Mm.
So, typically, for somebody with hyperactive ADHD, typically the overwhelm will often be caused not by external factors, but by internal factors. And I often get people with ADHD, the hyperactive, and they're saying, "I just don't have time. I'll never have time to
Ah,
do all the things." But all of the things are kind of self-imposed things. Does that make
yeah,
sense? It's
yeah.
like you feel like there's never enough time. You feel like, and I've got people that come in with, how are they going to get all of this done? And when we take it all out, some of those things are hobbies or activities that should be nourishing, but they're kind of turned into
Mm.
tasks. They feel like they have to, and they feel like, how are they going to get to them? So it's like an internal overwhelm, no matter what's going on externally.
Okay. Yeah.
And something I just thought of on that as well is the time
Yep.
blindness piece, which is another massive part of ADHD. I have met barely anyone with ADHD that doesn't have the time blindness piece. So Gabor Mate describes it as whatever was supposed to develop the maturity around ability to see time hasn't developed. And I'll give you an example. I had somebody come in and she said, I want strategies I want ADHD friendly strategies to be more efficient in my workplace because I'm not getting everything done. So as always, I kind of sat and went, okay, so what's actually underneath this? Before we move to the strategies. So I said, okay, just explain your working week to me. What are you doing? What do you usually? And we're about 20 minutes into the session. And she realized she was trying to do 80 hours work in a 40-hour week. And I said to her, so can I just check in? Are we still looking for ADHD friendly strategies? And she went, no, I need to take my long service leave. And I need things. So often this time blindness piece also plays into the ADHD system because when we estimate things,
Mm.
we might estimate they take an hour. They're going to take 2 or 3 hours because we see things at face value. We don't calculate all of the little things that are involved, say taking the kids to the
Okay.
pool. It's just the hour taking the kids to the pool. It's not half an hour either side wrangling the kids or commuting or, we just see the thing. So that, that what is ADHD, that time blindness, that internal overwhelm, trying to not being able to estimate and forecast time well. And also, if we're better off just waking up at 6 in the morning, rolling out of bed and getting straight to a workout. You'll know this. I don't miss my Mondays, do I?
No.
But if you give us too much time to get to places, the possums will start and we'll get distracted. And then, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like that time blindness. So if we've got too much time, and then if we've got 10 minutes for something, we think it's just not now. We've got a world of time. We try and
Okay.
get the washing done and the dinner cooked. And yeah. Fun, Nadine.
Hey, I'm just I'm just checking my notes. Okay, let's talk about some of the things that I want to talk a bit more about your specific work, and you've touched on it a couple of times. But I'd love to talk now that you've sort of talked about how we define what ADHD is and how someone might like figure out what's going on. But how much does, and like I even mentioned, the distractions that we all have in our everyday lives and how people can misconstrue that. Is that the right word? Misconstrue that as having ADHD.
Yes.
How much do those lifestyle things affect someone with ADHD? Like technology, all right? Having too many tabs open on your computer, your phone going off. Some people having two phones, and how much can be resolved by I'm not asking too many things at once. Yeah, so okay, let me take a step back, Jen. I've
Don't
read.
worry, you ask me 2 things and I'll give you 10 answers. No, I'm kidding.
I've read recently that children with ADHD, like a large proportion of them, improved significantly with lifestyle changes, specifically
Yes.
diet.
Yes.
I think that children, especially when they're exposed to technology, when they're exposed to unfavorable foods, can have behavioral issues. So I guess this is a two-part question. Is it the chicken or the egg?
Yes. Yes.
And do removing those things help a child or an adult with managing
Yeah.
their
So you will
ADHD?
hear various different things. I've got a friend in England that had an ADHD support person that actually favored technology and giving them technology. I think
Ah,
only for certain amounts of time, but they considered that their downtime. So I think the
ah,
answer is it sometimes depends. I can
Mm,
certainly give you my own experience and that of my kids. So the first thing you said, I think, was diet.
mm,
My Before my youngest was diagnosed, he was probably only about 2 years old when we got asked to leave the swim school, one of the swim schools. That was the first swim school. The second one we also got asked to leave. But he was sitting on the edge of the pool and he just couldn't listen to instruction. He kept jumping in. They were thinking he was being naughty, but he was
mm,
actually just really overstimulated, the
mm.
sounds in the pool. Anyway, around that same time, we were having a lot of issues with him in daycare, and he was in a big daycare. Um, and at that time, I didn't know what was happening, but I just wanted to try different things. So I actually went to Sue Dengate's Fed Up. She had four boys. She does this thing called Fed Up, and it's all about diet and colors and preservatives. And anyway, tried that. And I basically went round the supermarkets for weeks on end and just looked at all of the packets. Do they have those E's in them that she says don't do? And within a month, the daycare teacher said to me, that is a different child.
Wow. That's
So,
scary,
I
isn't
mean,
it? Really?
it's crazy. And I'm not great on it now because I'm not a great foodie person. But if I see that things are happening, then I'll pull back on preservatives and E numbers. And so I wish I could say to you that we live clean, but
Mm,
we're human, we don't. But at that time, it made a huge difference for him. And I thought, geez, Jen, for breakfast, you've been giving him one of those Twiggy things, those
oh
processed,
yeah.
and that was kind of what I was feeding him, but then it went to like chicken and rice and all of these clean things. So food for us did make a big, big difference, especially at that age.
Hmm.
The other thing that made a huge difference, huge, and it's similar for adults, is when I say psychology, I don't mean psychology sessions, but changing his mindset. So we went into this deep parenting program for behaviors when I think he was about 3. And the difference was amazing. We were told to focus 20% very quietly on the negative and 80% just expand the positive. Oh my gosh, I love it when you did that. And when he wasn't displaying the good behaviors, we were to really quietly say, I don't like that, and then move him on. And anyway, I won't go into it, but we had this big
Mm,
process of how to manage behaviors with him. And basically, this was a year or two later. No, I think it was when he was about 5. We'd done all of this work with him. We saw the differences within a couple of months. It was insane. It was really cool. Just really giving him that time and space, getting down on his level, understanding him, hearing him. And then I remember I think he'd gone through a bit of a rough patch, but then the school phoned me when I think it was about 5. He was in kindy or year 1. And I thought, oh God, what's he done? And they said to me, I just wanted to share with you the leadership qualities that were exhibited by him because another kid punched him in the face or something, but the way that he handled it was amazing. And so when I say psychology, yeah, I don't mean psychology sessions, I just mean
mm,
your own psychology with that person. And I think adults are pretty similar. The way that they have their mindset about themselves and the way that their internal self is. If you think that you're crappy and you're broken and
mm.
you're going to be displaying those behaviors. Whereas if you believe that actually I'm really cool and I'm good, and it's like yeah, I can't think of the word that I was going to use. So in answer to your question, chicken and egg, I do not think that ADHD is created or removed by things like food and
Yeah.
therapies and things like that. But I do think that they are all huge components of that ecosystem.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. Like what you said about the psychology of like the parenting tactics, I guess, because I think that we can all take some tips from that. It doesn't matter whether you've got an ADHD child or
Absolutely.
not. Like
Yes.
encouraging them, listening to them, accepting them, rather than
Yes.
like pulling them up on all of the shit things all of the time.
Oh, because it's natural, isn't
Changing.
it? Our attention goes to where they do the crap things
Yeah,
unless we're conscious about it.
yeah.
And it's like it doesn't happen by itself. It's a skill that we have to put time into and
Totally.
learn.
Yeah, definitely. And I was actually going to ask you about that in relation to someone who's been diagnosed, because I think even the word diagnosed, I'm
Mm.
sure I heard somewhere that that was not like the ideal term to use,
Mm,
because diagnosed is associated with illness or something
yes,
wrong with you. Is
yes.
there another term?
I use the word system a lot. I mean, is there
Okay.
another term? I say I have an ADHD system rather than I have
Diagnosis.
ADHD.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, diagnosis, I guess you can have any diagnosis of anything. Does it have to be negative? I don't actually know the answer
Well,
to
I
that.
think that if you go to someone for a diagnosis, it has the
It's
connotation,
typically medical.
and there's
Yeah, it's
something,
typically
yeah, it's
negative.
because there's something wrong, or that you're trying to
Yeah,
get something fixed. So can you talk
yes.
to me a little bit about that, like that idea of
The
working with someone's
approach.
strengths instead of like, because
Yes.
I would expect that for a lot of the time people would come to you because there's something wrong with them that they need to fix.
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
how do you turn that around so that they actually do realize that
That they're
it's
not
not,
broken.
that they're not broken? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so interestingly, my approach, I guess, is I love Brené Brown's work. I don't know if you've heard it on fitting in versus belonging. And
Okay.
she says that fitting in is the opposite of belonging, and you'll see where I'm going in a minute. But so what a lot of people with ADHD are trying to do is, oh, I've had this diagnosis. Now, how can I fit myself in with this neurotypical world rather than belong to myself? And
Okay.
what they're doing is, in essence, kind of rejecting themselves, right? If you're trying to fit in, and Brené Brown just describes it beautifully, and it's something that I found in the ADHD world. And then when I saw Brené's work, I was like, this matches so well. So when you're trying to fit in with society or in the shoulds or fix your apparently broken parts, then you're rejecting yourself. So my approach is to flow in, not fit in, right? So
Okay.
it's like, how do I now flow in with my system? And if you can remember it, can you ask me that question again? Because there was something else significant that just came up.
Yeah, it's just like, how do you flip it, like from it being something that needs to be fixed to
That's right.
something that
Yes.
is
Yes.
like a
So
strength?
often in our coaching sessions, and one just that was right, something an example came up from for me. There was a guy and he had his first session with me. It was the most beautiful session. He said, I feel real shame because I've lived in this house for over a year and I never take the house keys out with me. And he thought he wanted help with his working memory. And he's like, how do I take the house keys out and not lose them? I said, well, what happens? He said, always have to get new keys, can't I lose them all the time. And he said, I just leave my door open, not open, but unlocked. He said, I feel this real shame about it because I should be able to. A normal person takes their keys out. And I said to him, okay, do you live in a safe area? He said, yeah, it's really safe. I said, so is that not your own wisdom telling you that you don't want to lose your keys? And so you're actually being really wise by doing that system that way. And he's just, Nadine, he's come, I can't tell you the last year of seeing him from the start to the finish. And the message that he sent to me just before Christmas talked about authenticity. And he said, this year, my authenticity, that is the word for me. And he said, I love little me, childhood me, I love adult me, and I no longer need to change for somebody else. If he's unhappy with something and he wants it for himself, he'll change it. So, in answer to your question, how do you flip that? I think that you support people to see that the things that they're doing are not necessarily wrong. Sometimes they might be not the most efficient way, but in that case and that story, there was nothing wrong with that. It was like, actually, that is the wisest thing you could do. Well done. I quite often hang my washing up on my balconies, or in a house, it was the internal staircase. And my children's father came to visit and he looked at me, he said, don't you have a washing line? I said, we do have a washing line, but it's all the way out the back. And if I hang the washing out there, I will forget it's there for days and it'll rain on it and then it'll dry again. So that's another example of using your wisdom. And it's like, I don't care that it's hanging on the internal staircase. Oh, remember it's there. I can see it. It's tangible. So that's that kind of flipping things, you know. It's like I don't have to do things the way that everybody does them. I just need to find my own systems and flow in, not fit in. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Mm.
Can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned earlier on in the piece emotional regulation or dysregulation? How does
Yeah,
that present
yes.
itself? What does that mean? Is that a common thing that people might
Oh,
see?
yeah, yeah. So emotional dysregulation can take many forms. And again, it's not a wrong thing or there's nothing wrong with it. I can imagine, I can remember I saw somebody say, I wish people would stop telling me that I needed to regulate myself. And I think it's not, nobody's saying suppress your feelings or, you know, that's like the opposite. But the emotional dysregulation, I think, mainly comes from that oversensitive nervous system. Things so rejection sensitive dysphoria, if you've heard of RSD, so that is a form of intense emotional dysregulation. So what that means is that that sensitive nervous system, when somebody perceives a criticism or they're worried that they might be criticized, their nervous system gets really overactive and then they go into protection mode. Like it's like a safety detector. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like, and if we think about emotional regulation, is often a safety detector. Am I safe? Am I not safe? Am I psychologically safe or am I psychologically unsafe? So you get emotional dysregulation all sorts of ways. I mean, obviously there's sadness, anger, all of the range, but for people with ADHD, I think a lot of the emotional dysregulation can stem from a root nervous system response of I'm not safe. So if you think about that, emotions come from our body mainly, right? It's not the end result, that narrative in our thinking brain. So if you think about that more primitive part of us, something happens and it affects our nervous system and our emotional, we kind of go into a bit of fight or flight. That's our body. And then we go, what's happening? Ooh, I feel this horrible feeling. And then comes the story, right?
Okay.
Then comes the narrative that we create from it. Whereas if we can get a handle on what's happening first in the body and go, I just felt anger. What's that about? Just before it hits the brain, just before it hits that narrative, then we can stop ourselves. And I can remember years ago, that's one of the things I learned to do was be more connected to my body. I wasn't so connected to my body. And then when I was, I could feel, I'm feeling that feeling. What's happening? I'm getting angry. Is there another perspective? Is it absolutely that? Before it goes into complete story, before it goes into, we kind of locked into this and then the ruminations and then that, you know, absolutely fact when, as we know, our thoughts are not facts at all. And our perceptions are very wobbly. So, yeah, the emotional dysregulation part, that I'd say that for most people, RSD, rejection sensitive dysphoria, is a huge part of the emotional dysregulation. Yeah.
So what's happening then that someone's thinking that they're going to be rejected for having a particular emotion or
So, no,
they
it'll be in
reject
a particular
themselves? Like what?
circumstance or a particular thing. And my brain just sort of jumped to the workplace. And so, for a lot of people in the workplace, when that RSD is present, they feel like they can't speak up, they don't have a voice, they can't put healthy boundaries in place, they go into people pleasing. So, RSD at its core, we all have it, right? It's a human safety mechanism is to be a bit fearful of rejection and but in a healthy way, not a disproportionate way. And we go, I don't want to speak up in that situation, or I don't want to put myself out, or whatever it is. But for many people with ADHD, that RSD is disproportionate. So it will
Okay.
limit them in certain ways. It will manifest in maybe in defensiveness, in anger, because they perceive they're being hurt in a relationship, or it will manifest in people pleasing at work and just saying, sure, I can take that on when they've already got 10 other projects and they know they'll have to work on Saturday night. So it's like it comes from a disproportionate weight on what other people will think. And if you think if somebody had a really high sense of self or a really comfort level in emotional, psychological safety, they wouldn't be as worried about what other people think. So they'd be able to say, oh, I can put that boundary in place actually, and nothing terrible is going to happen. Whereas RSD is more like a catastrophic thinking something's going to happen from small things. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, totally. Okay. So I'd love to hear more about how your work actually works, how your coaching works, who you work with. But question, and it kind of dropped in at the beginning, but we didn't really go into much detail about it. And that's and this is, I guess, a concern with for me with people who are doing the online survey, and and I don't suppose they can get medicated without having a proper diagnosis. But
Right.
the 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 ease at which someone can just be medicated for ADHD, is it necessary? I know that you don't want to like tell people they shouldn't be, but like you can have an opinion that you
I
can do
do
a
have an
disclaimer.
opinion. I will
You
just
can
put a disclaimer on.
you
I'm
can
not
do
a
a
medical
disclaimer. You're not a
professional, and I
medical
have,
professional, but you have
yeah,
your own experience, and we're talking
and
like,
many clients experience. So
yeah.
I can share a bit. So your question was around medication. Did you say should people be easily
Yeah, well,
medicated?
like is I feel like, and it's not just with someone who has ADHD, but someone with perimenopause symptoms who gets given
Yeah, right.
medication. It's like
Yes.
the
Okay.
handouts.
So
Is it
I have to,
necessary
so
as a
100%
as a
it
first
depends.
as a
As a
first port of
first
call?
line off, again, it depends because I'll give you another example. One of my clients, really, really bad place and had a really strong gambling addiction. The day that he got diagnosed and started taking medication, gambling addiction went away
Wow.
by itself. So there was obviously a craving in him and something that felt like it was missing. And quite often for people with ADHD, when they take the medication, it feels a bit of a gap of something
Okay.
that they need or something like that. But for everybody, it's different. That is 100% not, that is not a blanket. Other people, I got told by a doctor friend when my son was maybe 6, don't you think you're being selfish by not medicating him? And as seeing the psychology, the food, the everything just changed our whole worlds. So my personal opinion is, what's the purpose? What is the purpose of the medication? And I do get a lot of people coming to me, and actually when I used to do parent coaching, the parents talked about the medication. I had one young boy, he was 11, and mum was beside herself. She said she'd fallen into chronic depression. She's emailed me at first and she listed out 12 different specialists that he had seen, functional doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, even taken him for the I can't remember what the sessions are, the neurofeedback or the
Okay.
whatever it is. But and she said to me, he'd been on all different medications, he had oppositional defiance, he'd get out of bed shouting F off to the world. He was only 11 years old. And she said to me, she said the medication made him like a zombie. He used to play basketball all the time for his hyperactivity. Medication made him like a zombie. And I said to her, what was the purpose of the medication? She said, I don't know. The psychiatrist just gave it to us. So he got diagnosed and they just gave it. So I don't know what's behind that. I don't know whether they did talk about purpose, so I'm not judging on that. But what I'm saying is my thing would always be, what's the purpose? And actually, I coached her for a few sessions, and then the boy came to see me, and he just, first thing I did, he walked in the room. I said, oh, mate, I can't even find the light switch in here, which was not a lie. I said, do you think you can find it? And straight away, he looked at me and he found this light switch. And then he came in. And anyway, I did not treat him like he was a problem to be fixed.
Yeah.
So I did his strength survey, and I said, and he was naughty in school. And I said, I bet there's some teachers that you're not naughty with. And he went, oh yeah, Miss so and so in science class. And he loved her. And it was like, aha. So this isn't a deficit of yours. This is a situational thing. And it ended up that he felt emotionally unsafe in certain situations. So
Right.
what we needed to do with him was make him feel valued, make him have his strengths, put him in situations where, and he actually went on to not have the medication. So adults are very Some people it makes them more anxious. Some people it is the magic bullet, and their
Mm,
emotions are wonderful. And for most, probably about 70%, it's there's a cost and there's a benefit.
sure.
So, just like most medication. So my answer to that is absolutely, my personal opinion is it depends. Let's find
Mm,
out the purpose. What are you actually trying to do with that?
yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, I guess, a big concern when you're hearing of children taking medication is that it's because they don't necessarily, it's the square peg in the round hole in a classroom situation where a teacher's trying to take, control over a whole bunch of kids. And if there's one that's, disorderly for whatever reason, the parents beside themselves and someone says take this, but they do, like, they can turn into zombies, and that's really quite
Yeah.
sad.
It's not, I must say it's not the majority. That
No.
is that is certain cases. So I must
Okay.
say it's not the majority. And I'll also say that there's a lot of research out there that shows that medication is wonderful and it
Okay.
has changed a lot of people's lives.
Okay.
And there's also there's studies to say that people with ADHD on average, and this sounds bad, but their life expectancy is around 13 years shorter. And when you look into the top reasons for that, super surprising, the top reasons for that were around things like impulsivity. And
Okay.
so, if medication tempers impulsivity, then it's got to be better in the long run. So, what I'm saying is, medication has been life changing, life saving for a lot
Right.
of people with ADHD, but it's not always the case, and it's not always the right
Yeah.
approach to the right avenue. Yeah,
Yeah.
really depends.
Yeah,
And
sure.
it's important to
That's
get
good
that
to know.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. We're getting close to the end of our hour. I'm not going to like cut us off as soon as we get there, but we'll start to round things out a little bit. So let's talk a bit about what you do as a coach, because you've got your own business and you work mostly
Mm.
online, or do you work face to face? And who do you work
All
with?
online now, actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So
Yeah.
mostly adults now, or do you still work
Yes.
with
Yes.
parents who are trying to understand children with ADHD?
Yeah, I do a bit of parent coaching still. It's definitely not my main. At least 90% of mine is with adults.
Yeah.
And when people have asked me to coach their children in the past, I typically say that I will coach them to understand their child,
Yes.
understand the ADHD part, because they're in the home
Yeah.
24/7. I'm not.
Yeah.
So that's what really makes the difference. And the only reason why that I've coached a few kids is because I first met the parents
Mm.
and the kids have wanted to. That's another thing. Coaching in itself, you kind of have to want it. So
Yeah.
coaching only really works if you want it. And
Yeah.
sometimes if it's the parent that wants it and not the kid, then it's probably the parent that needs it.
Yes.
There are plenty of beautiful ADHD coaches that do coach kids and families, and some of them have been family trained as well. So they're actually
Okay.
trained in the dynamics of families. And I have got an amazing network of ADHD coaches, and they're all, I can't tell you a more supportive profession. They are really, really just open and lovely. And we're kind of all in it for the cause rather than the business aspect,
Yeah.
which is just beautiful.
And so
Yeah.
when someone comes to you, how, first of all, how does, well, obviously podcasts help. How does someone find out that ADHD coach is even a thing? An adult, so like, does someone who's an adult with ADHD, is it like they've just found out and they're like, I got to do something about this, I need some help, and so they find someone like Jen? Or, have you got a whole mixture of people, like people
It's a
who've been
mix.
trying to live with it and not getting along, or
Yeah, it's definitely a mix. It's not all newly diagnosed. It's probably people in the majority, maybe they've been diagnosed for about a year or something, and they've been
okay.
down some rabbit holes and they've been trying medication and they've come across this coaching thing and they never knew it was a thing. But not everyone. I mean, everybody comes to it from a different way. A lot of people, their psychiatrist says to them, you
Okay.
could really do with finding a good ADHD coach, because it's like the psychiatrist there for the medication side. But then they say, if you find an ADHD coach, they're the ones that can help you with the skills. Because as they say, pills don't teach skills, right? And it's like, and also it doesn't magically make you interested. in the things that you weren't, or it doesn't magically make you know how your brain works. Because when we're coaching, we go, "Ah, didn't know that about myself."
Mm.
And then you can apply that in different situations. So it's almost like you get to know your brain. You're like, I see what you're trying to do, and take a different way around it. So yeah, really different routes. Michelle Toner, who is the godmother of ADHD coaching, she's done an amazing job of um, getting information about coaching around to psychiatrists, so that now a lot of psychiatrists in Australia have that in their toolkit, so they can also offer to people, here's your diagnosis and this is what's going on, and I'll be able to support you from a medication standpoint, and a good coach will be able to support you with going forward in your life. How do you now navigate that ADHD system now that you know it's there?
Yeah, cool. And how long would someone have coaching for?
Great question. So I always say I like to
Life.
coach myself out of a job. No, no. No, actually, I say that I still have coaching myself. I think that we've all got things that we can't see, and we've all
Mm.
got situations that might be helped with coaching. But as a what is the word? Acute? That's probably not the word. As a kind of ongoing, consistent support mechanism, I say that after about, say, 10 sessions, hopefully you now have the keys to the kingdom. And I had a client recently, and he was what he actually said, he actually asked me quite a similar question. And I said to him, you've kind of got the keys to the kingdom. I've just helped facilitate that. They were always in you. You just didn't
Mm.
know yourself. So coaching is a very, we believe that everybody has their own gold. We're just helping them find it. So it's not a hierarchical position. It's not a, I know more than you, or I'm better than you. It's just that I have the skill set to go on that detective hunt with you and ask you all the right questions and help you see what you can't see. And I had somebody just this morning, and we were going through the session, and she said, Jen, she said, kind of want you to just give me that strategic steps. And I just smiled, and she said, and we sort of went, share what you can see. Anyway, I won't go into it, but there was a conflict between her mindset and what she was trying to do. And just by mirroring that to her, it's like we hold a mirror up to
Mm.
what people can't see. It's like you'll be in your business and talking this, that, and the other. And I'll be like, I'm just going to point that out to you. Do you realize the way that you said that? And they'll be like, oh, no, what was that about? So, yeah, so that coaching is really, so back to your, how long do you have coaching for? Some people, the shortest is probably about 6 sessions.
Yeah.
That's normally parent coaching, actually. Some people around 10 sessions. I get people to invest in a journey because I say this is about change. You can
Yeah.
back out at any time, of course, but this is not a one and done. But typically around 10 sessions, and then people might come back for maintenance. They might come back for, some people I have come back once a month. Some people I have come back twice a year. It's a bit like maybe if you've been through psychology and then you have something acute happen in your life and you go, coaching would really help with that. So
Yeah.
in general, I think that teaching people how to manage themselves and giving them that own skill set, because I have a lot of clients that now coach themselves. It's wonderful. Great.
What, they are coaches? They've become coaches,
Well,
or they
no,
coach them?
oh, I do have a couple of those as well. But no, ones that now know what questions to
Yeah.
ask
Yeah.
themselves. They're not stuck anymore. And
Yeah.
they know, my hope for people that go through coaching is that by the end of whatever, they now know how to get themselves unstuck. And they'll only come to me for things where they can't, but they
Mm.
learn their own skills while they're in coaching. It's superb.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Mm.
How can people find you, Jen? We've got your info in the guest directory, so they can obviously find you there. But is there anywhere that you generally direct? What's so
I'm
funny?
smiling because I remember you said to me you only put Jen in
Yeah,
your
don't worry.
something, and
I've
I what?
added Lewis onto the end. And if the links aren't in there for your website, then we can add them. But is that the best way to find you? Is there like a main directory for ADHD coaches, or you've got your own
Yes,
website?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, because I certainly won't be the right coach for everybody. And
Okay.
I think that most coaches are at capacity as well, or full near. capacity sometimes, like we ebb and
Mm.
flow. But so ADHD Coaches Australasia is
Okay.
the best directory because everybody on there is qualified. They're all trained, they're all qualified. It's an amazing directory. It's the one that the psychiatrists give out. Um, and everybody's at different qualification levels, but also there's all different profiles. So
Mm.
you might want somebody for your child. You might want somebody that's been through the same experience as you. There's a lot of people that go, oh gosh, that really resonates. And
Mm.
so there's males, there's females, there's really, really good selection. And I would say that anybody on there, because there's also a lot of coaches that are not trained or qualified. I don't just mean ADHD, but in the world. And you don't want to end up with somebody that's just calling themselves a coach and hasn't
Sure.
had the right training.
Yeah.
So ADHD Coaches Australasia is the most comprehensive and the one that's the most formally, yeah, everybody on there is
So
trained.
you're obviously on there, and
Yeah.
we'll share your personal info,
Yeah.
your website, in the guest directory as well, and in the notes. Jen, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh,
It's been really
thank
insightful
you.
and, like, yeah, just a really super important topic because it's like so prominent in today's
Yes.
society, but I feel like we don't know that much about it. And so
No.
having people like you that can educate us is super important and really helpful. So
Good.
thank you
And
so
I'm
much.
sure, yeah, I've probably just given you the tip of the iceberg. It's so nuanced. So, but hopefully that information helps
Yeah, it's
people.
great.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And congratulations on popping your cherry.
Ah, thank you so much for making it so fun. Ah, thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.